mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Mike Wells. I'm a resource advisor with Atticus, and today's presentation is 7 traps that stop lawyers from growing revenue. Before we begin, I want to thank you for taking time to join us. We're going to have Steve Riley leading this session for us today, and I want to talk about a few logistical items with you in regards to questions. And we're going to answer your questions near the end of the broadcast. If you are unfamiliar with how to use GoToWebinar, you have a little dashboard. And to ask a question, you can either send a chat message to me privately as the organizer. And if you'd like that question to remain anonymous, please indicate so. The other method is there's a little hand icon where you can indicate that you have a question or a comment, and we can call on you. And when we do, we'll unmute you so that you can be heard to the presenters and to everyone else in attendance. So the first question that we usually get is, will this be recorded? And the answer is yes, it will be recorded. And I'll be sending out a link to everyone with a copy of the recording that you can watch again or share with colleagues. So today's presenter, as I mentioned, is Steve Riley. Steve is an attorney and an Atticus Practice Advisor. He's been coaching attorneys one-on-one for over 15 years, and he is the creator of the Dominate Your Market program, Practice Growth program, and Double Your Revenue workshop. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Today's webinar is really focused around the 7 key traps that we've seen lawyers adopt, I guess, or use to prevent themselves from growing their revenue. And I really have 2 goals out of this workshop or webinar today. Number 1 is to help you identify and avoid 7 traps. And number 2, at the end of the workshop, I'm going to ask you to take on the 2015 challenge that we're doing at our company in honor of our 25th anniversary, which is the challenge that we're laying down for a lot of our clients to play for doubling their practice revenue. With that, let me just go ahead and walk directly into trap number 1 and talk about this. Probably the biggest trap that we see lawyers struggle with is failing to take time to think and work on their practice. And what I mean by that is that for most lawyers, they have what we call a crisis-driven practice, where every day they walk into another problem, another crisis, whether it's a client crisis, a referral source crisis, or a staff crisis. They're just constantly bombarded, and they're just a little overwhelmed with stress. Number 2 is they're chasing cash flow. They're trying to bring in new work. They're trying to bring in better clients. They're trying to bring in cash to make sure their operations are covered and things are profitable. And they're also time-starved. And from our perspective, it's really easy for us to say you should take time to invest in your practice and strategize. And it's hard to do that when you feel like you're completely starved for time, trying to figure out, how do I move things forward when I can't deal with what I got today. And instead of doing something really extreme, we recommend that you calendar in advance time to think, strategize, and act. And I recommend minimally a day a quarter. So if you look at your calendar and you say, gosh, I can't do it right now, well, look at your calendar and say, what day can I set aside as my future practice day? What day can I set aside to protect my practice so I can work on it, whether it's a systems process, a marketing concept, or getting those blogs you've been promising to do forever completed. But really figure out how can you work on that practice in that one day. My other suggestion is if you can't do 1 day a quarter, I would suggest that you set aside 2 hours a week. Make an appointment on your calendar, just 2 hours a week to work on those projects. And then my suggestion is if you can't do 2 hours a week, then just do a 15-minute sprint every day. And I call it an improvement sprint. If you're not in a position where you can say, gosh, I can calendar 2 hours, I would recommend that you just set a timer, whether it's on your phone or your computer, and just do 15 minutes to move something forward in your practice. And that's really something that's designed to help grow your practice from the perspective that you're either working on a growth strategy, a marketing strategy, a pricing strategy, something that's going to allow you to move that practice forward. A lot of lawyers never take time to act on their planning around their practice. They just keep running. Great, so that's trap number 1. That's our recommendation for trap number 1. I'd like to talk about trap number 2. And trap number 2 is failing to establish a minimum case value. And lawyers sometimes fall into a trap. If they know how to do a case, they'll take it because they think to themselves, well, I know how to do this type of law. It's easy. It should be profitable, and they take it. And it's regardless of the actual value of the case. And sometimes if they don't know how to do a case, but they actually need the cash, they'll take the case, which in my experience, these two things can really, really gunk up your practice pretty quickly. Really, our recommendation here as a strategy is to upgrade your case value. The quickest way to start this is to establish a minimum case threshold. But what your minimum case threshold is really depends on the type of practice you have, depends on how long you've been practicing, depends on how strong of a practice you have. But for some attorneys, a minimum case threshold may be a $1,000 case. Say, okay, I'm not taking any cases that are worth less than $1,000. Other lawyers, the minimum case threshold might be $10,000 or $50,000, depending on the type of practice they have. So you want to take a step back and say, okay, how do I determine my minimum case threshold? And there's a couple quick ways of doing that. Number one is that you can look at your past clients and rank them through a scorecard. And I'll give you an example of the scorecard in a second that gives you a way to think about that. Be clear on what your case values are now and what your average revenue per case is. In my experience is you don't have to go back and do an extensive analysis. You can just look at the past 90 days and say, over the past 90 days, what was my average case value? So for example, if you brought in 10 cases over the past 90 days, and the low-end value might have been worth $1,000, the high-end value might have been worth $30,000, you want to combine those together and establish kind of average fee per case and look at that as a benchmark and just kind of analyze, okay, where are those cases at? And then really look at lopping off the bottom 10% or 20%. Now, my suggestion is to try this for 90 days and see what you can open up in your practice from not only a time management perspective, but also get really, really clear in your eyes what a great case is and what a bad case is. Here's an example of the intake form or a client matrix form. And if you want this, don't hesitate to email us. We can send you a copy of this. But this is basically a really simple ABCD client. So you're ranking what your great clients look like. And here you're really trying to focus on the case value predominantly. In my experiences in a lot of practices, the lawyers are never clear on what a great case is, so they take about everything in the door. Really, ultimately, what we want to do is figure out what our D's and maybe even our C case values are, and then draw a bright line and say, from this point forward, I'm only taking my A cases and my B cases. And which is really, really a courageous thing to do in your practice, but our experience is a very liberating and freeing thing to do because it opens up the opportunity for a higher caliber and better cases coming in the door. Trap number three is failing to protect yourself from burnout. This is an incredible problem for attorneys. It's probably one of the biggest problems that's not talked about. It's clearly not talked about in the industry. We have a really bizarre perspective that the more we work, the better we are, and the more we should be rewarded. And lawyers brag about how many hours they work. They brag about how hard they work. And that really doesn't support a long-term view. And what we really see is that lawyers will try and grow their practice and really try and just think that the way to move forward is to work harder, work faster. And the resulting of that is they will start to ignore their energy, their fatigue. They'll ignore their energy levels plummeting. They hope that things will get better, and they don't. And they typically will just start working harder and longer to try and avoid the fatigue that they're feeling. And they call themselves names like wimps. And okay, I'm being too tough. Maybe I'm not, maybe I'm really not up for the challenge of this anymore. And what really is going on is that they're just getting burned out. They're getting worn out. They're getting overly fatigued. And when they do that, they're really impairing their best asset, which is their judgment. So what we see is that a lot of lawyers really need to take a massive step back and look what you can do first and foremost to protect your physical health. What can we do to protect your physical health? so that you've got really great energy and you've got really great focus. Number 2 is, what can we do to protect your mental health? Now, a lot of lawyers have a used to life. I used to have vacations. I used to read. I used to have hobbies. I used to exercise. And it's because they've become so absorbed by their practice, they become enslaved to the practice. And as a result of that, they really have sacrificed both their physical and mental health and are on the verge of either a physical collapse or a mental collapse. And then they also sacrifice their most important relationships, usually the people that they love. They take complete advantage of because they can't keep their promise to them. They can't be on time for certain things. They can't be able to spend high-quality times with the people they love. And as a result of that, they become more fatigued, more frustrated, more resigned with the practice. So our suggestion is to protect yourselves from burnout is really to take a step back and say, okay, what can I do today to start taking better care of myself physically? What can I do today to take better care of myself mentally? And what can I do to protect those really important relationships? Because ultimately what we've learned over the past 25 years is those 3 key things will allow you to have a long-term, stronger practice. What your clients are paying you for is your judgment, your ability to solve complex problems. And having a strong physical well-being, a strong mental well-being, and a great family and social relationships will allow you to keep your peak judgment of capability going at all times versus being worn out and fatigued. So that's trap number 3. Trap number 4 is failing to plan and train for strategic delegation. So let me just take a moment and kind of explain this. First, I want to explain the difference between tactical delegation and strategic delegation. Tactical delegation is where you usually hand off a task or a project to someone. In our eyes, strategic delegation is a system or a process or even a whole department. So, for example, a simple example would be drafting a will. For those of you at wills and trust, you may hand a will to a paralegal and say, go, please draft this will. Paralegal drafts it, brings it back, gives you a rough draft of it. That would be a tactical delegation. A strategic delegation is saying from now on, all the wills that are going to be drafted in this firm are going to be done by you. You're going to meet with a client, you're going to do the intake, you're going to draft the will, and then I will meet with the client to review the will and deliver the will, or maybe just walk in and shake the client's hand. But the difference is a strategic delegation where that paralegal is now in charge of that system, that process, or even that department. Our experience is that lawyers don't take the time to train their support team systemically. What they usually do is do what we call trial by fire, which is basically, here's a file, go figure it out. Abdication, it's now your problem. Or drive-by training on their way to court saying, do it this way, do it this way, do it this way, or they get frustrated and just say, I do it myself. What our recommendation is to avoid this trap is over the next 90 days, just select one thing, and one thing only, that you can strategically delegate that's currently on your desk. Now, I don't care if you delegate it to someone on your team. I don't care if you delegate it to somebody virtually. I just care that you look at what's on my desk right now that I can strategically delegate. Based on my experience, most lawyers, about 50%, literally half of what's on their desk, is ripe for strategic delegation. Now, when you try this over the first 90 days, it may not work the first time. It may not. It may fail miserably. If so, I don't want you to take a step back and say, well, that was a dumb idea. It didn't work. It works. What probably didn't work was the real issue would be that you probably didn't have the right person. You didn't have the right system. You didn't have the right process. You chose the wrong thing to strategically delegate to learn from it. Or you really didn't invest the time and the training into making sure that the person that you strategically gave that to would be successful at it. So my experience is that if it breaks down, take a step back, learn from it, and study why. Because if you don't figure out how you can strategically delegate the things that are on your desk today, you're not going to be able to grow the practice tomorrow. Trap 5 is pricing too low and staying there. And what I mean by that is that a lot of lawyers, once they set a rate, whether it's a fixed rate for fixed prices on their, they might do fixed prices in their firm, or they might do hourly rate. or they might be contingency fee. But what they usually end up happening is getting a fixed number in their head and finding that number works, and they stay there for a long, long time. They never upgrade, or they never look at ways of improving their pricing or the price per case or the revenue per case. The second thing is that we don't see lawyers consciously teaching their support team, like their paralegals or legal assistants, their associates, and any other financial producers inside the firm how to be more effective. And our experience is we can just spend time teaching and training the people that you already have on how to be more effective on their revenue production. It could be a 10 to 20% growth increase inside the firm, which ultimately will go to the bottom line. Our recommendation here is twofold. I want to encourage you to gently go back and look at what your rates are, whether they're fixed, hourly, or if you're doing contingency fee, it goes back to perhaps looking at the average fee value that you're generating off your cases, and look at how do you upgrade gently over the next 90 days the value of those cases. Number two, if you're an hourly rate shop or a fixed price shop, my recommendation is to ignore your peers. Lawyers really worry way too much about what other lawyers charge, and my experience is what other lawyers charge really doesn't matter, unless, of course, you're regulated by the court. If you're in the bankruptcy business or the probate business or the guardianship business, any business where a judge is going to ultimately approve your fees, then you've got to pay attention to that. But that's such a small segment of the legal industry, and my experience is that it's such a small segment of the population. So, for example, family law firms, I would see family law lawyers get really, really uptight about this. And when they actually look at how many of their fees are approved by the judge, it's usually a very small percentage of their actual cases. So my point is, ignore what your peers are charging, because what they charge really doesn't matter that much. Looking at what other lawyers charge is something that we do to build our confidence. Ultimately, the question is, whose opinion matters? And 99% of the time, it's the person who's writing the check that matters. It's the client that matters. It's what their opinion of the value is that matters. So you may be looking at your peers for figuring out hourly rates or fixed prices to get some level of confidence as an anchor, as a comparison point in the marketplace. But my experience, it really doesn't matter. What really matters is your ability to communicate value effectively to your clients and have your client go, yes, that's worth that. Great. Trap number 6. In a world of social media, in a world of amazing search engine optimization, one of the most simple and easy ways to grow your practice is still good old-fashioned referral-based marketing. And our experience, though, is if you're too busy to think, then you're more than likely going to be too busy to market. If you're too busy to market, then you'll never be able to strategically and systemically upgrade your clients over time. And if you can't upgrade your clients over time and your costs continue to climb, you're going to have a problem. You're going to get caught sooner or later by that. My experience is that I'm going to recommend that from this call, you could put together a simple referral-based marketing plan. I would recommend that you identify in writing who you want to connect with or connect to, and go out and see what you can do about generating some more work. And my experience is a face-to-face meeting, a over-the-phone request, an old contact, is really probably some of the most effective ways of growing business. But when you go to put together this list, I suggest 2 categories. Number 1, those who send you great work now. That would be my A list. Those are the people that I would absolutely want to reach out to now. Now that list may be 4 to 6 people. It may be ideally 10 to 20. For some of you, it might be 30 to 40. But making sure who those people are now. My experience is that if you just make 1 phone call or 1 meeting per week with them, 1 phone call to 1 meeting per month with them, and dedicate a day per week to do that, you're going to generate a ton of business. The second list would be those who you want to send you great work, but currently are not. And that would be kind of your team that you want to upgrade into being your A list. So that's your B team, your trying to move into your A team. Now, our suggestion is just make a list of fun things that you like to do. Now, that might be golfing. It might be going to, one of my favorite things to do when I was practicing was going to hockey games. I like Scotch tastings. I like to cook, so I'd have people come over to my house with cooking lessons with a chef to come over. So there's a lot of great things that you can do to connect with your referral sources. But ultimately, nothing's going to be more powerful than asking for work. And Mike and I put together 2 great examples of asking for work. If you go out there and play what I call referral bumper car, where you go out and talk to people, you see people, but you don't ask for work, you're just going to spin your wheels a lot. And a lot of lawyers will do this. They'll belong to the Rotary, they'll belong to the Chamber, they'll belong to a networking group, they'll belong to a lot of different things, but they realize that they're not getting any work from it. These are 2 very simple requests that you can make for referrals, and these are completely appropriate. You know, this is one of the ones I loved all the time, the board one, which is, Dan, gee, you know, I'm bored out of my mind. You got any great cases that we can work on together or that you can refer me? Because I'm just bored. I need something really great to sink my teeth into. A fun one. Patty, you know, I have a lot of fun working the cases together with you. You got anything fun that we can work on together? These are 2 ways that you can ask for business without looking like you're asking for business. I know it sounds simple, but it's generally, in my experience, very simple. The difference is between lawyers that just go out and play social bumper cars, where they meet people at the chamber, they talk to lawyers at, you know, committee meetings and bar meetings, versus the lawyers that go to those same functions and ask for referrals. Our experience is about a 50% difference, meaning that the lawyers that go out and ask for business will generate 50% more business than the lawyers that just go out there hoping they'll run into somebody that will perhaps consider them, you know, as a place to send business. Great. Trap number 7, no plan to deal with change. In our experience, things are going to change, and we really don't like change. We would really like to see it to a point where we feel like things are calm and normal, and our practices are working, and, you know, people are doing what they should be doing. But our industry as a whole is changing quickly. When you consider some of the amazing internet giants have been created in the past 10 to 12 years, it's pretty incredible when you consider what LegalZoom is doing in the marketplace. I think they did $156 million in revenue and did, I think, a $12 million profit last year. Number 2 is that we can consider that we used to joke, my partner and I used to do a presentation that we called the 5 predictions about the legal industry. And we started doing the presentation about 3 years ago, and one of the jokes I would make is that Walmart would have a legal clinic. Well, sure enough, this year Walmart rolled out their first legal clinic. Called Access Legal Clinics. Now, that may not impact your practice, but it's going to affect your practice sooner or later. Number 2 is change is something that no one really likes, unless, of course, it's happening to someone else or you're recommending someone else change. You know, our brains are wired to prevent change, and so it shows up to us like stress. And number 3 is that for a lot of lawyers, it feels like time is speeding up, so there's less time to actually think. There's so much more information flowing at you that you really don't have time to think strategically about things. So as you think about this, these are 3 really incredible challenges. The industry's changing, we don't like change ourselves, and it feels like the rate of change has increased terribly. Our recommendation, though, is that you're going to have to look at change as an element of life. You're going to have to think about change as an element of your practice that won't go away. So if you're going to have change, there's 2 ways to do it, either having it done to you reactively or go for change through proactive thinking. Now, from our viewpoint, and we just deal with change all the time, we help lawyers, pretty much all we do for a living is to help lawyers implement change. And in order to implement change, these are the 3 absolutely crucial ingredients. Number 1, you need a compelling reason to implement change. You need a reason that is going to be either very exciting to you or a reason that probably scares you to death that you want to implement change. If you don't have a compelling reason, you won't implement change. And there's a lot of lawyers that have been practicing for 25, 20, 20 to 25 years that are thinking they're on the downhill slide of practice, they don't really want to change. You can see this in a lot of larger firms where there might be a 65-year-old partner, and you might be talking to him about why you need to invest into growth strategies, and he's not thinking about growth strategies. He's just thinking about maximizing income and maximizing his retirement plan and perhaps maximizing the sale of the firm. In his case, there's no compelling reason to grow. But you want to think, what is the compelling reason for you to adopt growth inside your firm? What's a reason to do it? If you're comfortable, you're not going to make any changes. If you feel like, well, I'm making the income I want, I'm taking the time off I want, that may not be a compelling reason for you to adopt change. You may just be going, I'm good, I don't need to do it. In our experience, if you're good and you don't need to do it, anything that we can talk to you about how to improve your practice, how to help you move forward, how, playing the game of doubling your revenue, whatever those things may be, it won't happen. Number two is to have an accountability and follow-up structure. There's a plethora of studies out there that say that if you learn something without an accountability and follow-up structure to implement it, the learning of it really won't matter. For example, if you've ever read a diet book, reading a diet book alone means nothing. You don't lose weight by reading a book on diet. You only get the result you want from implementing what you learned. And the studies that we have will show that only about 2% of the people after learning something can implement it successfully. 98% of the time people will fail. However, if you put an accountability and follow-up structure in place for them, their ability to grow actually jumps tremendously. Their ability to implement will jump tremendously. Number three is strategy and coaching. Thinking through what's my strategy for implementing this and what's the feedback on how am I doing implementing. In our experience, these three elements are the key things to implementing change successfully in your life or in your practice. Great. I'm trying to do my best to keep this webinar as effective as I can time-wise, and I think I've hit all the 7 traps the way that I want it to. If you have a question or an issue to have me further explore or talk in more detail about one of the recommendations, don't hesitate to talk to Mike or send us a text about that. But I've got about 5 more minutes I'd like to share with you a couple of things. Number one is what's next for you. What I said at the beginning of this webinar is I want to encourage you to take on our 2015 challenge of doubling your revenue. And you may say, nah, I'm not up for that. If you're interested in talking to us a little bit more about your practice specifically, probably the best thing to do is to consider doing a practice diagnostic. But I want to talk to us about the workshop for a few minutes because I really think the workshop is pretty darn amazing because it's a one-day workshop where we go through 4 or 5 concepts that allow you to take your practice revenues to 2 times what they currently are. We walk through a concept that we call the strategic pathway that is really teaching you how to increase velocity in your practice. We walk through the brainstorming sprints that play around with the 8 to 10 core concepts behind a practice. We put together a growth map, and we walk through some implementation strategies to help you think through how you're going to do your 2 times number in a reasonable time period. My experience is about 1/3 of the firms that do the workshop will double the revenue. Another 1/3 will increase their revenues by 40 to 50%. Another 1/3 will probably do absolutely nothing because they don't have the capability to implement change in their practice. They don't have the accountability structure. They don't have the coaching. They don't have the strategies. They just can't move forward. They have the ideas, but they lack the support team or the support structure to do it. Now we're teaching the workshops all over the country. The next one is March 12th in Fort Lauderdale. The investment for the workshop is $995 for the first attorney, $795 for the second attorney, and my goal is to have no more than 25 attorneys in the workshop. Now, in our email to you, we did make a promise, which was, a gift, and our gift is simple. It's basically saying if you are interested in doing the Double Your Revenue workshop, and you would like to come to the one here in Florida on March 12th, if you register within 7 days of this webinar, we'll give you a $200 scholarship, which will reduce the price of the workshop for you. Now, if you're saying, no, I'm not interested in a workshop, the dates don't work for me, I don't think I can go, I think I really want, but I do want to talk to somebody at Atticus more specifically about my practice, then our suggestion is do a practice diagnostic. And the practice diagnostic does two things. Number one, you work with one of our certified practice advisors on ways to improve the 4 cornerstone areas of your practice, which is marketing, client development, time management, staffing, and cash flow and profitability. In addition to that, you also get a DISC assessment, which is a profile tool that allows you to get clear on what your strengths are and have you focus on those strengths so you can maximize the results in your practice. It's really a tremendous tool that allows you to think through, okay, this is really how, this is my strength. I should design my entire practice around my strength rather than trying to improve my weaknesses over time. The investment for the practice diagnostic is $275, which also includes the DISC assessment and the report that goes with the assessment, which is about a $125 value. It takes about an hour, and it'll be with one of our practice advisors. If that's something that intrigues you, the easiest thing to do is email Mike at atticusonline.com, or you can call Mike, and Mike will set that up for you. With that, if you need more information about us, don't hesitate to go to our website, Atticus Online. And if you got a question or you'd like to have me expound or clarify any of the recommendations, just go to the GoToWebinar dashboard, send a message to Mike, and he will unmute you. If you'd like to remain anonymous, just let us know in your message or in your question so we don't announce your name. Or if you want to ask a question verbally, raise your hand and Mike will unmute you. With that, Mike, do you have anyone that has any questions that you would like us to
I do. I have one question that came in from Clara Margaret, and her question is, how would you modify the process for delegating chores to a paralegal so the paralegal is not at risk and the lawyer is not for unlicensed practice? Do you have experience with delegating so that the firm does not engage in unlicensed practice and can still capitalize on the resources?
Yes. Mark, that's a great question. The answer, bottom line, is yes. I think the key issue from an ethical and liability perspective really boils down to the supervision process. So getting really clear what your client can do, what your paralegal can do and not do, and have the checklist, the process, and the system as tight as you possibly can. So usually what I recommend is the first time you do it, you may say, okay, of the project, and we'd have to probably talk about a specific project, but we'll use the will example earlier. If we could take a will, and if we could figure out how to have the paralegal do 50% more, if we could have the paralegal just do half of what you're currently doing, so you may meet with the client and have the paralegal meet with the client at the same time. You have the paralegal immediately take over on the intake process, go through the drafting, and maybe have a 5 to 10 minute review with you as a will. And then that might be your first stage to implementing a strategic delegation with that process. So, there's probably like a 2-hour process just alone on how to think through the process for a strategic delegation. But hopefully that helps. If not, I would take advantage of the practice diagnostic and spend some time with the coach to take that apart a little bit more for you. But we have firms doing it all the time. Some of the more interesting things that we've seen firms do it's pretty profound, some of the things that we've seen law firms do. But it's really about the training, the systems, the checklist, and the process, but more emphasis on the training and the process so that the paralegal is not going to cross that line. Mike, do you have anybody else?
Nope, that's it. There are no other questions, no other hands raised. So with that, I want to thank everybody again for coming today. Steve, thank you. Everybody can expect a follow-up message from me, which would contain a link to watch the recording of this video and registration link for the workshop and information about the practice diagnostic.
With that, thank you, everybody. I hope it was of value to you. And Mike, thank you very much.